Hey everyone, we'll get started in just about 2 minutes, waiting for people to trickle in. We had about 60 or so people that signed up, but a large majority watched this later. So we'll still wait a few minutes. We've got, 10 people on, which is enough to get started. So this will be the Wind Masterclass for GADS compliance for 2024 rules. So let me stop the video and get started. If anybody has any questions, please just put them in the chat and we will handle them as we go. You don't need to wait. It's better that it's, context specific. So please feel free to, you should all have access to the chat. All right, so let's walk through. And again, this is going to be for wind. If you're looking for solar, we just finished that. There is a recording of it, and you'll be able to. I'll show you an email where you'll be able to get to it. So it's myself, Amit Patel. I have Wing Cheng as well, and Rashid Khan on here. A little bit about Integ. We are a software. Utility software provider, but we are not going to go into too much detail about us. This is not a sales type of webinar. We've got some of the largest countries, clients in the country, bunch of different software. Today, though, we're going to talk about GADS. And again, we're not going to talk about our software. We're going to talk more about the rules and how you can comply for wind. Again, I brought this up in the last webinar I did, but at least 80% of the surveyed folks will need automation. Up to this date, as of the last survey, only 30% were going to be ready by January 1st. So there's a lot to do. There's not a lot of time. So the deadline is in August, but most of the folks we're working with will be ready in January 1st. If you are a little bit late, it's okay, but just makes things a little bit more difficult. For us, we're using our system, PowerGADS. It automates everything. There's a simple dashboard, and we automate getting the data from SCADA, cleaning it, and then we also have the synthesis. So this creates per turbine level events. And then we have a synthesis algorithm that will create the NERC events based on whatever NERC rules there are. So it's all fully automated. You don't have to do anything except possibly update cause codes and put in descriptions with our system. But we're also going to show you how, if you want to do it manually or if you want to automate yourself, we'll walk through that in this. Again, if you have any questions or if you need any complimentary sessions, you can email Sunkit at this email, please. And I'll put that in the chat later as well at the end. And any other resources for wind or solar, please email Sunkit, and it's all complimentary. You don't have to be a PowerGADS client or an Integ client to do this. So we'll start with wind. For the performance card again, we have regular, and then we have also hybrid units that are going to need the energy storage. So just keep that in mind. If you have energy storage hybrid units, message Sunkit separately, and we'll show you how to do that. We're not going to do the hybrid or BESS type of units right now. We will do that at a separate stage. So really high level, the steps are going to be obtain the data, clean the data, detect outages, and then synthesize. So what I like to start with is the performance record and start with something very simple. So all of these items in yellow here, right, we can knock out at least half because these are mostly going to be static. Now, I get a question often now this one, if you look, right, the net maximum capacity. There have been questions because based on the NERC rules, it says you almost have to calculate it based on each month and what's going on. For our purposes, most clients are doing this as a static capacity, but if you look at the NERC rules, it actually almost implies that you're going to update and calculate it separately every month. For now, we're doing this more as a static capacity, but we'll be sending out updates on this in our newsletter as NERC provides more information. But everything else is pretty simple. These are all really going to be zero for you unless you have some inactive or retired, and then subgroup status is going to be active. Now, wind will be a little bit more complicated than solar because almost everybody has subgroups. You don't have just one group for the entire plant. You will have subgroups. So we're going to start out. These are all very simple. And then we're going to go into gross generation, expected, and net actual. So gross generation is going to be what's going to be per turbine generation. This is going to be in your WPS or SCADA. Now, these are generally at 10-minute levels for most clients. If you have 5-minute, great. But from the last meeting, NERC said it should be okay to use the best numbers that you have for this. So hopefully you have WPS or 10-minute generation per turbine. That's what you're going to use. For the net generation, this will likely be in a different place in your Pi or other system. And just make sure, again, if it's 10-minute, use 10-minute values. If it's top of the hour, which it should be top of the hour, or it should be end of the hour, not top of the hour, but make sure it's end of the 10-minute period and not top, and they're both at the end of the 10-minute period. When you get into expected generation, you have two options. Either this is going to come out of the system that you're looking for, and remember, this is the temperature adjusted one. This is not the one where you're kind of doing machine learning or you're doing historical and based on that, what's going to come out, right? This is just what the machine curves are adjusted for temperature. Even if you're not doing anything close to that, in reality, they don't care. This is the formula. You can go into the NERC DRI, but they're very specific. So please be very careful when you're looking at this and make sure that you're using the temperature corrected one. Your engineering folks should know this. And if you need help, we can go into more detail on this. You could set up that hour session with Sanket, then we can walk you through some of that as well if you have questions. So the details of it is that you're going to need actual generation, the ambient pressure, humidity, wind speed, and you're going to need this power curve. This is going to be, and this should be corrected for the average site elevation, but this is the kind of theoretical curve that I was talking about. And based on that is what they're asking for the generation. And again, this is an equipment constant. The dark blue are real-time measurements. So hopefully, there's no more questions on this, but if any, please put them in there or you can contact us later for this. So once you've done that, then we're going to go into active turbine hours, right? So what that's going to be is you have to figure out, hey, is my contactor on? That's going to give you these CTH hours, and you can get this information based on the faults and other statuses. The active turbine hours will basically be, January has 31 times 24, which is 744. And let's say you have 100 turbines, then that's going to be, 744 times 100, which is 774,400. So that's how you're getting the active turbine hours. Very simple. This, we're going to look at, your different Pi statuses. So if you look at your data for turbines, you're going to see that, you have this different types of data, and based on what's going on with the different flags, you'll get the status that contactor's on, and you're going to be summing those hours. And if it's in 10-minute increments, you'll be summing those 10-minute increments. If it's 5-minute, you'll be summing those 5-minute, and you can have partial hours there. So All right. Now, we just talked about the contactor on. The only other state is going to be contactor off. So on or off. On goes to CTH, which is number 12. Everything else is going to go to another place. Now, when it's off, we have three states. Either you're, kind of in this IR mothball or retired, which we're going to skip for now. If it is, this is very easy. Everything's 0. Or the unit's available or unavailable, right? So if it's available, then everything is going to go to either a reserve or a Ruth. Now your Ruth it's available, but you can't generate for very specific reasons. This you'll be able to get from the codes. If you sum all the hours, you're going to have a specific bucket for this. Whatever isn't here then is going to go into here, because for most folks, they're not able to tell when you're in reserve. It gets a bit complicated. So just keep in mind, if you can figure this out, then the math will add up and you subtract everything and you subtract this number, what's left is going to be this. Now, once this happens, you're going to have unit unavailable. And when you have unit unavailable, you're either in a forced or an unforced, and the unforced can have 2, planned or maintenance. For our purposes, if you don't know, everything's going to go into this and then you have to figure this out later. And for our purposes, we look at the ISO and other data and other internal data, and we're able to tell which ones are planned fairly easily. And then this, sometimes we're able to tell, other times we're able to tell, clients need to put in a little bit information and they need to code that event. But either way, all the automation's done. It just takes a couple minutes to code any maintenance from logs. But if you have that information, we're able to automate the entire thing. So once you do that, then again, for reserve and Ruth, the Ruth is going to be based on turbine output, fault code, operation code, status, turbine flag. This will generally tell us what's going on, right? There's no resource available. That's what Ruth is, there's not enough wind or something's going on with the wind that we can't generate. So that's going to be Ruth. And again, what I said about the resource is that you're going to sum up all the hours and you come up with the unit available hours, and whatever is not in this bucket, you can do reserve. Some companies have a better way of doing this, but so far I'm not really seeing a super 100% reliable way. And if you know how to do everything else, then these are simply the hours that are left over. Again, if any questions, please let us know as I'm going through this. Wing, also, if you have any input, let me know as I'm going through this. So now we're going to look at the outage hours. Again, we went through this. And contactor on. Now we're talking about contactor off. We talked about reserve and Ruth. With the contactor off, we're going to skip this and talk about the unit unavailable, right? So when unit is unavailable, what we're going to get is either 2 states, or forced or unforced. A lot of times you can't really tell. So you will have to look at other systems. If you're not sure of this, again, send that email to Sunkit. We can set up a session. It's complimentary. You don't have to be a PowerGADS or an Integ client. We'll walk through and show you what you need to do. And it's going to depend on what information you have captured electronically if you want to automate this. So there's multiple variations, but a lot of this can be solved, or it can be solved up to a point, and then you have to code the event if you can't solve it. And these are going to be turbine level events. And again, what I want to show is that we are going to have a lot of turbine level events, right? You're going to have all these turbine events, but they're only going to sum up to a couple of NERC events. But it's important that you capture these because it's going to help later. And as NERC has the rules, you're going to need to capture all of this as well. So just please make sure that And again, we only care about the outages, right? We do not care about derates for turbines, no matter what. Even if every single turbine is derated, we do not care. So what you're doing is making sure you capture all the forced events, and then we can create them into NERC events. And same thing for these purposes. We are not counting the deratings, you're just counting the full outages per turbine. And those sum up to, you know, a derating for the entire plant, but at the basic level, we want only cases where the full turbine is out in some way. So once this is done, again, you have what I talked about is all of these calendar hours, 744 times whatever the turbine is. Everything needs to add up, right? Between inactive and active, and then within active, the available resource unavailable and unplanned outages. So just make sure that this is done properly. So once you have that, we're going to go into the event card. Again, the same thing we're going to talk about. Get your SCADA data, remove the chatter. You know, we're going to get forced outages per turbine. Yeah. So, okay. So Timothy, for where there's missing data, and, you know, we could set up a call later to walk through the details of this. So there's two cases. If you're missing big chunks, you're going to have to look at this. What we're finding in specific systems when they go out, like we've seen cases where the entire month is out. It's hard to replace data. Now, if you see that a few pieces are missing, we have logic where we look at the generation and we're able to say, hey, I can continue the state before, or if not, I have a default state where I can be like 90% sure it's going to be that. And because it's a 5 or 10 minute state, I can plug it in. I don't have to worry. So that's really what we're doing with our automation. But then where we find huge chunks missing, then we say, hey, we can't do anything about it. And then what happens is the person that's doing the coding, they're going to say, we in our dashboard show that, hey, these pieces are missing, and they're going to go in and they're going to manually add an event, and they're going to say, hey, I added in an event manually, and our automation knows what to do, and it does everything that's needed to make sure that that's accounted for. In a lot of cases, that ends up being a full outage for the month or that period. It's out because for whatever reason it was out. So I don't know if that answers the question, Timothy. You can, you know, put it in the chat if that answers it. If not, like I said, you can contact us and we can go through that in a bit more in detail. Okay, awesome. So yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So again, remember, the loss has to be greater than 20 megawatts. You know, you're going to store event by turbine through for an internal, and 95% of the max loss force capacity for that event has to be back, right, for you to do this.
So
now,
just want to add something to your last slide.
Yeah.
So this is related to what Timothy said, right? If you have missing SCADA data or you have missing PI data, and you know, and then after somebody discover that there is a problem with the event, you only report the event start when you know about the problem. So if you have missing SCADA and you really don't know exactly when the when the equipment problem occurred, then you report the time when you found out about the problem with the equipment. It is, if you can guess and use your best guess to go back in time and say, you know, probably 5 hours ago, this problem started, then you can put in 5 hours ago. But if you really don't know, because you don't have the right SCADA data or you don't have the PI data, then you enter the event started when you found out about the problem.
Yes, that was very helpful, Wing. Thank you. The other thing I want to talk about is that you can have these turbine events, right? For a lot of people, it's hard to get these cause codes, and wind may be a little bit easier in solar, but you have two ways. You can say, hey, I'm only going to create an event per cause code. So here, just the 608s would be combined, the 603s would be combined. But by that time, you may not actually have a NERC event. What we're doing internally is we're saying we're going to aggregate all events because they allow you to do it per cause code or all events to meet that 20 megawatt threshold. So we are choosing to aggregate by I apologize, by all events, right? And Wing, I don't know if you want to talk through that real quick.
Yes, so NERC is right now allowing us to either report event by cause code, meaning you aggregate all the losses per cause. If they all have the same cause, you aggregate them together into one event, and if that event exceeds the 20 megawatt threshold, then you start reporting that to NERC. That's one way to do it. The other way is to aggregate all the events, right? Doesn't matter what cause, right? If they exceed 20 megawatt, then you start reporting to NERC, and you give them a primary cause code, and then you can give them multiple secondary cause codes that add up to that 20 megawatt loss. Now, if you do it by aggregating regardless of cause, that way you will have events that last a while. And if you're waiting for equipment and the equipment doesn't arrive until a couple of months later, now you have an event that is going on for a couple of months. So one way is to have long events and multiple causes, or you have tiny events, right? Because per course you may not have, you might have a lot of different events happening at the same time, but they all have different causes, and they don't add up to the 20 megawatt, and therefore you don't report to NERC. So at this point, NERC doesn't really know which way is better. And in the training in last week, they said they just try to go and find out which is a better way. So it's an evolutionary process, and it's up to us how we want to report it. And for us, it is easier to aggregate them into a NERC event so that you can assign primary cause and secondary causes, because you have much fewer NERC events than turbine events, because turbine events happens regardless whether you report to NERC or not. They're happening, and somebody has to constantly go in and assign a cause code to each event, and that can be, pretty work intensive, labor intensive. So our recommendation is aggregate them and into NERC events. If they don't meet the 20 megawatt, they never get created. If they meet the 20 megawatt threshold, then you assign a primary cause and a secondary cause. But those are maybe a couple, 3, maybe 4 events per month. And therefore it's much easier to manage than to try to go in and assign a cause code to each turbine event.
Yeah, thank you, Wing. That's great and really important. So again, you have to make sure and figure out, are you going to just synthesize the events regardless of cost code? Or are you going to do it per cost code and figure that out? The other thing I want to point out is just remember with this, right? You have to figure out when you're 95% back, and for that you need and also you need the nadir as well for figuring some of that out. So, and this can shift as you keep adding events. So just keep that in mind, especially for those folks that aren't automating, right? It's going to get a little bit complicated. If you're automating, this is very easy for us to do, but if you're not automating, it gets a bit complicated. So, again, the other item now is that to get forced outages, you're going to have to figure out contactor off. And then you're going to say, for maintenance or non-maintenance, if you're not sure whether it's forced or, unforced, you're going to just assume forced, and then you can code it later. For us, a lot of clients come back in and they can update this and they can code it later if it's not forced, right? But if we have access to other systems, ISO and other, we're able to tell at least if it's forced or planned. And in a lot of cases now we're able to tell if it's maintenance. So just keep this in mind internally, right? So you understand how to do this. You want to automate as much as possible using these parameters. We're pretty much not able to automate a large part of this. So just keep that in mind so that you do as little work as possible to simplify. And, even if you can get to this, you have to kind of get to this. And if you can't, then you're going to have people manually code those turbine events. Once they're coded properly, then the NERC events, it'll roll up based on logic, right? So just want to keep that in mind. So again, part of this is getting to just the turbine events, right? That's just the start of it. Then you need to synthesize and create. And before you do that, you need to know which way you're going to go, all cause codes or just by cause code. But even then, you're going to need to take all of these, and then following the NERC rules, you're going to combine them and say, especially if it's planned or not planned, you don't count that. Detecting multiple events, you have to do all of that. So that's a bit of work in itself, where you could have, these individual events are there, but now I only have one event, right? By the way, I show this screen all the time, but what this has, this is also showing actual versus expected generation. And then the top is just the outages. So what this means is that I'm good for 199.4 as long as I'm, showing I'm only derated for the entire plant this much. Even though there's going to be turbines that are derated for this amount, the plant was only derated that much. And individual turbine events become GADS events based on the specific rules that I talked about. So again, make sure you do this manually, or you have some sort of automation engine to do this. You have the start of the event, the nadir, you have 95% back, and then that green, which is the area under the curve, is what you're going to be integrating for your potential production loss, right? That's the critical number. That's the difficult number that you need to get to. And again, we can do this every 10 minutes. NERC has said, because at least in the last meeting, even though all the DRI talks about 5 minutes, I believe they will accept 10 minutes or whatever is best available. So yeah. And then last but not least, if you cannot have cause codes that are detailed based on faults and alarms, you can create a mapping of what the best cause code will be so that, the system can assign it. If you can't assign it, then somebody will have to manually do it. But at a minimum, you can get to these turbine events. Hopefully you can get cause codes as well based on the fault. If you can't, then, somebody's going to have to come in and, at the turbine event level, put in whatever the cause code is for that. And then based on the cause code, you can, figure out whatever is needed internally. So yeah, that's basically it. Wanted to keep this short and sweet. If anybody does have questions, please, I'll put the email again and I'll put it in there. Email Sanket, and I'll put that in the chat as well. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, we'll be ending this webinar soon. And if you remember this, we will have an email that will go out after this that will have all the information as well. And then we will also have, the entire webinar within this as well. So if you guys have any questions, you can let us know afterwards when you get the email, or I gave you guys Sunket's email. You guys can reply to Sunket as well. So yeah, if no other questions, then we'll go ahead and end the meeting. Thank you, everybody. Take care.